all, let me wish you a happy new year. It's still time, so I take advantage of this moment. May this year, 2021, be one of recovery, but also a year full of art. The film, The Artist August, directed by Brett Story, was proposed today, and is still available until midnight today. The film is proposed within the framework of the climate slot that we have developed since 5 months, but it's also the launching of a new slot we are developing with the US Embassy in Brussels, US and called USA on Film. It's a slot which wants to portray a more social United States of America, United States of America, which we hardly see through the small screen. I want here to thank our partners, of course, the US Embassy, BEBAT, our sponsor, but also the Millennium Documentary Film Festival for the support for the promotion. The Artist of August is, in its way, a complex film. It portrays a city, its inhabitants, but it gives us also access to the collective consciousness of people put under economical pressures, uncertainties, where social conflicts exist, and we can also feel the upcoming environmental disaster. New York and its boroughs are the starting point of the film, and we are in August 2017, so it means more than 3 years ago. What's also funny for us Europeans is that the film gives a small tribute, consciously or not, this I don't know, to Jean Rouch and Edgar Morin, Chronicle of a Summer, but also to Jolimet by Chris Marker that we shown recently in BOZAR. Brett's Story that we have with us tonight is an award-winning documentary filmmaker. She's based in Toronto and in New York. She's actually Canadian. Her films has been screened in international film festival as Viennale, True False, which is not a festival which is really well known in Europe, Oberhausen, Dok Leipzig, CPH Docs, Hot Docs, and South by Southwest. Brett was a 2016 Sundance Institute Art of Nonfiction Fellow and a 2018 Guggenheim Fellow in Film and Video. She holds a PhD in Geography. So Brett, but thank you for being with us. For you, I see in the clock behind that it's 2 o'clock, something like that.
Yes. Yes.
So welcome to Brussels, to a virtual Brussels. You won't see the city, hélas. But let's maybe, Camilla, do you have a question on the film that you would like to share with us?
Hello, hi everybody. I'm Camilla. Thank you very much, Brett, to be with us tonight. And yes, so I have a question. In this film, in the Artist August, you become a sort of, I'm gonna steal an expression from a critic from a review that I read about your film. You become a sort of anthropologist from the future. That means that through your camera, we observe and listen to people, to some people, and sometimes we might also think, ask ourselves, is the human species going to survive? We look at a sort of puzzle of people from different background, different ages, and different situation. And sometimes we also get attached to them. So my question is, how do you feel and what do you feel when you meet your subject? And when you ask the question, and especially the question you ask everybody in the film, what do you think about the future? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you both of you, Juliet and Camilla, for inviting me. You don't know how much I'm wish that I could be there in your beautiful city this week. But in the future, let's hope. Thank you for screening the film. You know, the film is the film emerged out of my own feelings about the future, which I had noticed over many years became increasingly pessimistic. I think that that's true of a lot of us. But you know, I felt like I noticed that not just on an intellectual level, but really in my whole body. You know, I would feel like I'd be thinking about decisions about the future, or trying to make decisions about my life. And there was this increasing feeling, there's been this increasing feeling of pointlessness and dread. And so part of the desire to make this film was to understand whether or not I'm alone in having those feelings, but also what that means for how we live. We still have to live even if we have those feelings. So how are people coping? And also for me, a film is always an excuse, you know, to meet strangers. And I was inspired by the Jean Rouch film and the Chris Marker film, in particular their generosity with the stranger. You know, we watch a lot of documentaries in which we have one or two or three characters and we follow them for a long time, and this sheer delight in the city as a space of encounter, and in the stranger and in the brief conversation as a source of knowledge about the world. And so you asked me, Camilla, about what it just felt like to you know, encounter people and talk to people, and what I'd say that to them. It was, I designed this film without knowing if it could result in the kind of film that I wanted to make, but I knew that the very exercise of going up to strangers and saying, "Excuse me, you don't know me, but I would like to ask you some questions and see if we might just stop here for maybe 20 minutes, maybe 2 hours and talk, what might come out of that." And I think I'm a shy person. I think that I always feel a bit nervous about that. I don't expect people will always respond well. And what's really wonderful is just how generous people really are. And you get this sense, I certainly got this sense, that people are hungry for connection. People are hungry for, you know, we were just talking about this, the spontaneous encounter. People want to be asked about their lives. People don't actually get asked how they're doing and how they're feeling all that often, especially by someone who doesn't have an agenda, who's genuinely interested. And you know, of course, this film takes place in New York, and New Yorkers are famous for being chatty. And that's what I discovered. I mean, most people said yes, you know, unless they were in a hurry and had to go somewhere. Most people agreed to speak to me, and they were very open with how, you know, what they thought about things. The one surprising thing was that I felt like and this is interesting, I don't know if this is just an American thing, but I noticed that people, even if they admitted they have a lot of worries or anxieties or stresses, they would be very quick to say, "Oh, but I'll be fine." You know, there's a kind of pressure to be optimistic. And I don't think that I expected that, that desire to say it's all going to be okay, and to give an explanation for why we should still all be optimistic. And I felt like part of the project of the film was to allow that to be part of the complexity of how we're all coping with, you know, the multiple crises of this moment. This is pre-pandemic, so it's the crisis of climate change, most omnipresent, but also just increasing costs and debt and political violence and all sorts of things.
So yes, in 2017, well, now we are in a complete different situation, but 2017 was the year of Trump presidency. It was less than 1 year that he was elected, if I remember correctly. And there was already an explosion of Black Lives Matter protest. And we see in the film that there was that accident in Virginia, I think.
Charlottesville.
So it was already, I mean, it was a quite hot period.
Yes, yes. And of course, I couldn't predict those things. I mean, you know, in some ways I couldn't predict that there would be neo-Nazis who would march in broad daylight in a major American city.
Accident, I mean, attack, terrorist attack, I don't know how to define
Yes, yeah,
terrorist.
yeah. But also it was all there. I mean, in some ways, one of the hardest things about the film was making it not about Trump. Because again, I'm not, you know, I don't know what the Belgian perspective is on the American situation, but there's a way in which Trump becomes a kind of vortex where all the anxieties of the moment get sort of put on him. So, you know, in some ways he becomes the great excuse for everything terrible that people are going through. And, you know, if you take the view that he's not the cause, but he's the symptom, then that obsession with Trump becomes very distracting. And so people would often in my conversations bring up Trump as a source of their anxiety. And in the edit room, we really tried to edit that out so that you feel his presidency as a presence, but it doesn't become the whole conversation doesn't become flattened and all about him as a personality. You know, because again, I think that it's about, the film is really about the kind of atmosphere of this moment, which is why, you know, Juliet, your comment about there being a kind of anthropological quality, or Camilla, maybe that was your comment about, you know, having this feeling of an anthropologist. I think that's right. I was interested in how do we look at ourselves?
Yeah.
You know, we're so used to looking at people at a different time and a different place and studying them and saying, how did they do that? And how did they live? And I think it's time for us to do that to ourselves. And so that was the kind of lens I tried to bring on this experiment.
Was the city of New York chosen by the fact that you were living at this moment in New York, or it was also deliberate? Because I can imagine that New York, because you are really portraying a New York we don't know as European tourists. If we go to New York, of course, we will see what you showed us. We will touch it, but we won't be in it. You know, we won't meet them like this, you know, because you take your time. But also what I really liked is that you take your time with the people, but you never forget about the background, how the infrastructure, the architecture, the building falling apart, the park with no grass anymore. And this for me were really interesting, because it's not only about the people, but also about an environment, an architectural environment. And is it something that you did really on purpose? It was really something that you were aware of?
Yeah, yes and no. So it definitely, I chose New York for, New York is felt like the right place to set a film like this for a number of reasons, because it holds so many contradictions, right? In American life, the richest people in the world and the poorest people in the country live in this same space. It's a sort of bastion of liberalism and calls itself progressive, but it is like a playground for tourists, huge parts of it. It's surrounded by water. It thinks it's, you know, inoculated from the threat of climate change, but Hurricane Sandy brought that to its shores. It's also a seat of global power. You know, it's a financial headquarters for the entire capitalist economy. So symbolically and also tangibly, New York is a great place to explore. It's like so many cities coexist in this one place, you know, and there's just an opportunity, as over filmed and over determined as New York is, you know, there's so many cliches about New York. It's also possible to discover.
It's a city full of cliché, full of.
But like Paris as well, right? Paris is also like, you know, and so to have that as the challenge, how do you show on the camera a different version of New York? Many different versions of New York was an exciting challenge. But I also, you know, I don't think it's just about New York. In some ways, I feel like any kind of big major city could have been a place where I conducted this experiment. Because again,
it would be interesting to do it in other cities.
Yeah, yeah.
Those,
And I wonder what differences and similarities would emerge.
Yeah, I think we have here a question that is related with what we just talked about.
Yes.
Go ahead, Camilla, if you want.
No, the question is about the cinematography. So the work with Derek Howard. The question is it's about the aesthetic of the film. It's from Mariana Cadenas. I truly enjoyed this anti-postcard of New York City, one that can only exist from true love for this place. The sequences are little films within themselves where there is beauty and quirkiness. Can you share more about how you arrived to this language with Derek Howard?
Yes, thank you for your question. Yeah, we had to work. There was a lot of working to figure out how to be spontaneous, I would say. You know, I think that I told Derek when we first started working, there was never going to be a shot list, and that I don't believe in B-roll. Every sort of moment that feels tangential is actually central. And the practice we would both have to do, I was finding people to talk to, but it was also going to be a film made up of observations. And so we both had to develop a way of like figuring out how to practice active looking. Because we were never searching for a specific thing. I really wanted to avoid saying, okay, here's this theme, here's the image that, corresponds. It was about just always working against expectations and allowing things to surprise us. And so everything that you see, almost everything that you see, even if something around it has been planned, there's still happy accidents. So we didn't, we went to the beach a lot. The beach is a great place to meet people. People are just sitting around. It's beautiful. But we didn't know that we would go to the beach and that the roller coaster was going to break down. But we had to be open to seeing it when it did happen. So that meant that I had to let him, not always take direction. We would just go to a place and I'd say, just notice things that trigger your curiosity in some way. And sometimes that would be me, so we would be on the beach and I'd say, Derek, can you like turn the camera? There's an umbrella that's rolling away. And I, in maybe a traditional film, you would have had to explain what that connects to, what that's about. In this case, on the one hand, it's about nothing. And on the other hand, it's about how life is full of strangeness if we allow ourselves to see it. And that there's, in seeing the world a little differently, almost as if we're occupying the eyes of a faraway visitor or a duck or a different species or an alien, that there might be some insights that come from that. So it was all about working with him to give ourselves permission to just be interested in whatever we were interested in and think not in terms of, thematic shot lists, but rather about what, visual curiosity. And that's really what we tried to practice.
Yeah. And what about, okay, this was more the shooting part, let's say. After, I'm curious about the editing part, or the how do you gather, because you filmed, I guess, lots of different things with different background, different people. How and you are telling a story.
Yeah.
How did you organize yourself? I can imagine that the editing was difficult. I can imagine, because it could be tempting to put everything together. But what I think, it's the sound. You have some moment of breathing with the sound, giving you maybe anxiety sometimes, but giving you a sphere. So was this idea of the soundscape already there in the beginning? Was it something which happened to arrive while you were editing?
Yeah.
But or did you?
Yeah. So I definitely knew from the beginning that we would want to work with it, that the sound design would be a, major part of how the film works. And that I wanted a sound design that gives a sort of texture to our experiences of really ordinary things. So I worked with a really talented sound artist named Ernst Carroll, who's best known, I think, for his work with, he worked on the film Leviathan and with other films by Lucien Casting Taylor and the Sensory Ethnography Lab. So he's a sound anthropologist, and he thinks a lot about field sounds and working with real material to create, understanding. So I talked to him before we'd even filmed anything, and then he wasn't working on it the whole time. I mean, Nels and I, the editor, and I edited this film for almost a year. It was a very long edit, precisely because, as you say, there's no plot, there's no narrative, there's no obvious structure. And so the only way we could work was through experimentation. And when you're experimenting, you're literally just being like, what happens if I put this here and then this here and then this here? And how does this change? And what are some happy accidents that can happen? And when I talked to my editor, Nels, one of the things I said to him is that pretend this is an archival film. Pretend I'm handing you a trove of archival footage that's been discovered. It's now your job to sift through this seemingly mundane archival footage and see what it starts to tell you. And then that's when you and I start to figure out how to give it shape. I do believe even films that don't follow a traditional narrative, they still need to have shape. And so it's our job to give shape to these sort of all these different moments. And I think, it was not at the end of the process, but somewhere sort of in the middle of the process, once we started having some scenes, that we brought Ernst in to work on the sound. And I'd say things like, sometimes I wanted to lean into the ordinary, and bring a kind of very ordinary space into really make it come alive. And sometimes I would ask him to use the sound to like disturb the sense of the ordinary. So the two scenes that I think of are the scene in the 311 call center is something where he it's like, it's just a call center, and he didn't use any other sounds. He just used the hum of the lights and the sound of the phone calls, and yet created this unease, this like deep unease to this very banal office space. And then a different scene would be the scene in on the subway. And one of the things he did that I just thought was so interesting is he just added this very quiet layer of water. So we're on the subway, and the subway is moving up and down, and the shots are very long, and we're noticing how tired everybody is, and we're listening to the narrator. And then there's just this very, very subtle element of sound, and suddenly the subway transforms into a kind of submarine. You feel like the subway is no longer on tracks but could be under the water. And so things like that, which were partly about being playful and also partly about estranging us from the kind of deep ordinary, were always a really important part of how I wanted the film to work.
Go ahead.
No, if you wanted to do a comment, because otherwise there is another question from the audience.
Okay, actually, it's very interesting that you are mentioning Lucien Castin-Taylor and the Sensory Ethnographic Lab, because those are people that we have been following those last 10 years, I would say. I was not aware, actually, that the sound person in your film was from that school. And so, of course, now it makes it more not obvious, but it rings a bell. So
Mm.
let's go for
Yeah, it was really an honor to get to work with him. He's very, not just very talented, but very thoughtful about why sound is so, it can be underappreciated in cinema, but it's so.
Yeah, and in this school, the sensory ethnographic lab, they are really sensitive with the sound. The sound is as important as the image, and it gives you other really feelings. It's
Yeah,
more organic. The film becomes more organic for the spectator.
yeah,
The
yeah,
experience is very different.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it's what I got actually with your film as well.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad.
So
You know,
it's
and all of,
funny. No, I didn't make the link actually with this with the cell, but now that you are mentioning them, I'm like, okay.
in all of my films, I'm interested in how to explore ideas and activate the intellectual imagination, but also have that happen at the same time as you are having an experience in your body. And I feel like that for me is the power of cinema, is that it can work on both those levels. And then something like absolutely spectacular happens when you're negotiating both of them at once. You're thinking all of these things, but you're also feeling, and you know, there's just a way in which you are being asked to know through your senses and not just through your mind.
Yes, I agree completely.
Yeah.
So the question is about the voiceover. Um, um, can you talk more about the choice of the voiceover? In the film, you do a selection of, you choose some authors in order to share your vision, your thoughts. So we have Zadie Smith, we have also Annie Dillard, and something from Karl Marx, Capital. And it's always Mariana Cadenas who's asking this question. So if you can tell a little bit more about voiceover, because for her, it took her deeper into the game of connecting a non-traditional narrative and somehow counterbalancing this uncomfortable or rather uneasy feeling. If you can say a little bit more.
Yeah, it was very, you know, I didn't plan on having a voiceover in this film. I've never had voiceover before. And the challenge of writing for film, I think, is really great. But as I said, one of the inspirational films was Le Jolimet by Chris Marker and Pierre Lhomme. And there's a narrator, like a lot of Chris Marker's films, a very brilliant narration. And so it was my editor who suggested that, you know, the film needed a little bit of architecture. Like the metaphor we used was kind of like tent poles. So it wasn't like explaining what's going on, but just providing another element against which things could have, the rest of the film could organize a shape. And so I thought, at first I thought I would write something, and I started to write, and I got scared because it's very hard to write. I mean, I like to write, I write a lot, but it is challenging to write for film because film doesn't need words. You know, film works with images and sound, and it doesn't need it doesn't need language necessarily. And so if you're going to use language, all the words need to be perfect. That's my feeling about narration. So I did a little bit of writing, and then I was at the time very taken with this one essay by Annie Dillard in which she described a total eclipse from 1979. And for me, her description of that eclipse, it was in some ways the best description I've ever heard for my own feelings about the climate crisis. You know, when she describes, you know, watching something happen from afar in a kind of state of awe and shock, feeling like an anesthetic is going up the arm, you know, that was my, in some ways, that is my feeling about the climate catastrophe. And so, and also there was an eclipse coming that particular August in the United States. And so I thought at first we would only use that text and it would be a kind of preface to the film. But I started experimenting with writing a bit of my own narration and then using that. And then I think Nels and I came to the idea that maybe we could choose some other passages, literary passages, that could be almost like part of the same part of the archive, like we're not just leaving the ruins of this earth, but we're leaving all of the words that have ever been written about the human experience. And so the final narration is a little bit of my writing, then this essay by Annie Dillard, this essay by Zadie Smith, and this essay by Karl Marx. And I experimented with a lot of different texts, but again, I was trying to find a balance between being too, I didn't want to be explanatory, but I wanted to evoke something that might help us, make sense of what else is being experienced in the film. And the Karl Marx passage in particular, I mean, Karl Marx is obviously associated with Marxism, but and politics, but he's a beautiful writer, actually. And this one passage from Capital in which he describes everyone everyone knows that the flood will come, but one hopes that it will fall on the head of his neighbor instead of himself. I feel like that for me also expressed this other theme in the film, which is about how we're taught to deal with catastrophe, when capitalism makes us all feel like we're just individual entrepreneurs who need to, find individual solutions to the problems that we face. And so the film in some ways is just about coping, right? And so I was thinking a lot about racism, about xenophobia, and about this way in which we're taught to just hope, or find reasons to believe that the disaster will happen to someone else and not us. And I felt like that passage very prescient, in terms of describing what people in the film actually say in their own words.
Thank you, Brett. Juliette, do you have a question?
No, go ahead if you have one.
But actually, well, the film, we might say the text. So we have the poetic text. You're looking for emotion, to evoke something. The sound, also the music, gives a mix of feelings. So my question is, what's your relationship with the viewer? What do you want the viewer to do, or what do you want from the viewer, actually?
Mm-hmm.
Or what do you expect, or do you want?
Yeah, that's a very hard question. I make films, so I'm a sort of, I occupy a strange place, I think, in the documentary world, because I make films about political issues, but they're motivated by strong political opinions and have a strong point of view, but they're not kind of traditional social impact films.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of that language in North America about social impact. You're making a climate change film. What's the policy that comes as a result? What do you want people to do as soon as they finish the film? And my last film was about the American prison system, and it's the same thing. It was a very unconventional take on the prison system. And part of what I want to do, part of what I'm interested in, is political consciousness. How can we become active and alive to our own experiences in a way that's empowering rather than disempowering? And for me, cinema can't make that happen by delivering a message or delivering a kind of prescription about what should be done, but it can open up the critical imagination. And so I guess my answer is that that's all I can hope for my films, is that they make space for people to feel understood. Maybe they recognize themselves or a feeling or experience they've had in the film, to be surprised, to feel confused. I mean, I like to work with a little bit of ambiguity, not because I want people to, be utterly perplexed, but because I think that being asked to do a little bit of work can be its own joy. For me, when I watch a film or have any kind of experience of an art, it's particularly joyful if it doesn't end when the credits roll, you know? If I have the desire to go out for dinner with my friends and talk about it, that's part of the life of a film. Or if I'm lying in bed that night thinking about it, that's part of the life of of cinema. And that's what I want to create. I want to create space where people, in this case, in the case of thinking about a very perplexing question. I mean, it is very perplexing. Certainly any good anthropologist from the future would ask us, how do human beings, when they know that they are actively destroying the conditions for their own survival, why don't they do anything about it? Why can't they do anything about it? It's a bizarre thing, right? And so, but it is very hard to get answers to. And so I guess I hope with a film like this that it opens up a space to think a little bit differently about what our connection is to each other, how we're coping, what are more productive and less productive ways to cope with our own anxieties, how the climate crisis connects to the crisis of immigration and border control, and in the United States and in many other countries, white nationalism is on the rise. How is that connected to the climate crisis? And so if the film offers just an opportunity to think about these things and to feel not alone in our own depression, then maybe we can become more active participants in a kind of consciousness that's empowering to us rather than disempowering. Does that make sense? I know that that's a little
yeah.
but that's all I can expect out of art. So it's all I try and do with my own projects.
I have one last question from the audience. It's from Sophie Soukias. She says it is a very practical question, but did you need any kind of official authorization to film your subjects, and did it somehow make the film more difficult than in Jean Rouch and Chris Marker times? Thanks a lot.
Well, I can't speak to what it was like for Jean Rouch and Chris Marker to make their films, but I think, what certainly does, I don't know if it could make it harder or it could make it easier that people are just so used to being filmed all the time, right? So for me, the way in which that makes things harder is that I feel like it's actually harder to get people to speak in an original way about their experiences. People are sort of always practicing to be on TV, it feels like. And so they say things that can feel like cliches. I had a lot of interviews that we had to leave on the edit room floor because it just felt like people were branding themselves. People were performing their own personality for the sake of self-promotion. And I think that that's very particular to this era. But I absolutely got permission from everybody. I don't film anyone. I mean, in public space, it's different. If I'm in a public space, then, I'm not using these images to surveil people or to put their lives in jeopardy. So I feel like it's all right to look and to film. And if people tell me, oh, I don't want to be on camera, then I absolutely don't film them. But anyone you see in close-up or anyone who I talk to, I asked permission and I got a release form for. That just feels like a sort of basic ethical way of going about things. But yeah, I do think people are very used to being on camera, and that can be useful, but it also can be limiting for a filmmaker when they're trying to kind of, like one thing I remember from the Chris Marker film, from Le Joli Mai, is that there's some scenes that I could never create in which someone's being interviewed and people start gathering around, and all of a sudden there's
I remember
in the screen. That would never happen now. People don't gather around to say, what's that object? Who's on? I want to be hello on camera. So that's a shame, because those are some of the great scenes, and they would be hard to produce today.
And maybe to close the conversation or not, I don't know. One of I like this. One of the first question that you are asking, because you don't know the people, and it's about the future. There's always this notion of the future. It's a very interesting question to get in touch with people you don't know, actually, because it goes in the intimacy without being a very intimate question, direct, intimate question, but at the same time, you elaborate because you're thinking about the present, about the past, and I really like actually this idea. So my question: what about the future? How do you see the future that knows as a drastic change in the politics Joe Biden arrived? What would be? How do you see the future?
Also in the cinema industry.
Sorry?
But also in the cinema industry, in the
Yes.
nonfiction industry as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because I premiered this film in 2019, and in the first festival that it played at, I went to, and I was 7.5 months pregnant with my first child. So very visibly pregnant. And both the first screening and the second screening, the first questions were about my pregnancy. And what was interesting was that the first question wasn't even really a question. It was sort of a version of the question that you just asked, except that before I even got a chance to answer it, they said, "Oh, but you must feel optimistic about the future because you're having a baby." Which I thought that was so interesting, because you don't need to feel optimistic about the future in order to have a baby. That's for sure. And also I felt like that person wanted to hear me say, after making a film like this, yes, I feel good about the future. I felt like it was more about what they wanted they were getting assurance from my body that the future was going to be okay. And I found that.
Yes, they could trust you. Yeah.
But the truth is, I think as a rational person, as a person who believes in science, I feel pretty terrible about the future. But as a person who loves people, and who believes that people want freedom and want to survive, I feel not optimistic, but like there's possibility. I mean, I think if we look at history, it's energizing to know that people have found the will to transform the conditions of their lives. And that's what we have to do now, is we have to transform the conditions of our lives. And I mean, the only thing that I wish we could talk about this pandemic in those terms. We're all suffering through this pandemic, and it's terrible on so many levels. And I just wish it could be considered more of an opportunity to change how we live, because that is going to become necessary.
That's the key also.
Yeah.
So one of the key in French, we are talking a lot about resilience. Maybe because I know that you can speak French a bit. Resilience, it's really how the people are able to rethink, to reshape everything. As you said, I also think that human beings, as always, the trick to survive.
Yeah.
And we'll always find a way to survive.
Yeah.
But it's also something that we feel in your film, because it's not, it's apocalyptic in a way. It's dystopian also in a way. But at the same time, there's a human hope. Says you understand that there's.
Yes. I think so too. Yeah. Yeah.
We can think about the future. It's better if we think about the future, if we can make plans in the future.
Well, that's why we have, that's, the role of AO in the film is to be the voice who says that, we must be able to imagine ourselves in the future in order to fight for the future. And I think that that's important too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. And I wish everyone there the best. And I hope, we're going to get through this, but we're going to have to get through it together, and in a really international way. So I think it's very appropriate to be in conversation with you all in Belgium right now from my place in Canada. And so I wish you all the best.
We wish you all the best as well, and we hope to see you again. And the next time, maybe in BOZAR, it would be
I would love
very
that.
nice.
Please invite me. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It was really nice to exchange on
Okay.
the
It
film.
was very interesting and inspiring.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
for
so
your
much.
time.
Okay. Take care, everyone.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.